So what I want to do is actually talk a little bit about like what is happening in the world of AI that is not AI, that is more about managing AI. Because I think at this point, we all know that there is not a single industry that doesn't have an AI influence. Everything, education, healthcare, IT, I mean, like you can name every industry, you are going to have influence of AI. This talk is not about whether AI is going to take over the world. And like there are evidences out there saying that people's jobs are safe, but there are also evidences out there saying that people's jobs have to be changed, clearly. So that is that conversation. But this talk is mostly about as you start integrating AI into your routine operations, into decision making, into various aspects of supply chains, you are going to deal with issues that you may not deal with routine technology. So because again, technology has always been there with us. Before AI was the idea around like, for instance, like SNAP, more of those kind of technologies used to be there. Salesforce dominates a lot of those things. So technologies have always been there, but what generative AI technology is doing this is giving you more of an expert choice opinion that again makes everybody an expert. So you don't need to be a domain expert. Right now, I was talking to somebody during lunch. You don't need to know coding to write codes right now. All you have to use is ChatGPT to write codes for you. You don't need all those things. So that really means that with the AI, you are powerful. But is your power used properly? And how can companies use them effectively? So that's the idea around this talk. This area of research is not just in one domain. So I come from a business school, I come from an operations background, but this kind of a work has to be multi-domain. So the people that are working with me in this actually come from law, school of engineering, in fact, humanities and sciences, because there's a lot of ethics aspect coming out of this. So that's the way we're trying to understand this problem. It's not just a business problem or an operations problem. It's more multi-dimensional. So what I want to talk to you is about some of the things that is going on right now and what you can all do as you think about these things. So before I do that, I mean, like, in fact, like this goes without any saying. Again, you all use AI. In fact, I have a project right now that is going on where I'm using AI to actually think about recycling. So we all recycle properly, or we all do something called wish cycling. We try to recycle things that we think can be recycled and we cannot recycle. So I have a project right now where, if you all remember, you all do recycling here, right? So if you remember, you have the same blue bins to recycle? A different color of bin maybe, but like you all know that you can't recycle like electronics in the recycling bin at home. You all should know that at this point, you can't recycle like water bottles with water in it. You can't recycle like plastic bags. These are all things that we think we can recycle, but we cannot. Now I'm using AI actually to identify as they are dumping. Think about, you have this kind of a bin in your house. As it dumps it back into the truck, I'm using real-time information to tell this gentleman that you're recycling incorrectly. I'm giving him notice. I'm even going to the extent of not taking up his trash because he's recycling incorrectly. So, and I can do it real time because of something called a robotic technology that allows me to like really understand the patterns as it starts dumping in to say this is what is happening. So it's everywhere. I mean, like I just gave you a very simple example, but you can imagine AI in decision making in healthcare, which is a big aspects of this. AI in terms of like logistics and operations. It's everywhere. Now, what that does is it makes each one of those individuals experts. They are not really experts, but it makes them experts, and they make decisions that may be right, but may not be right ethically. And that's the conundrum that you all should have. Let me give you some examples. What do I mean by that? Think about this. The real question here is, are we using these technologies in the right way, the right ethical way, right? Like, by the way, this is a picture that I used AI to generate. Now, I mean, like my question to me, it's again, am I ethically right to use something like this and say that's my copyright? It's not probably right? But those are the kind of conundrums that you all could face at this point. Let me give you an example. I mean, like, give you 4 different examples from 4 areas industry. So you all shop. You all go and, like, what's your bigger market? Kroger's, okay. So you can think about, you all go into Kroger. This was Target, real incident that happened in Target, where I shop based on my shopping pattern. So there was a daughter from a house shopping for, again, merchandises in Target. Based on her shopping pattern, Target started sending coupons to the family, saying that here are other things that you can buy. Now, what Target did was using what we call like big data analytics and AI to identify if you shop these things, you will shop this in the future. So essentially what Target did is use that information and send coupons for baby products to the family. So here is a father receiving baby product coupons like diapers and like baby powder and so on and so forth, only to wonder what was going on, because I don't have any babies in my house. I have a 18-year-old daughter in the house, but I don't have any babies, only to realize that the daughter was pregnant based on what kind of coupons that the Target is getting to it. Now, if you think about it, Target is smart. It's doing nothing wrong here, but it's invading the privacy of it's the daughter's decision to tell about her pregnancy to the father. But even before she opened it up to the father came to know about her pregnancy using coupons from Target. AI can do that for you. I mean, like, you can predict what you have based on your purchasing patterns in a way that some of the informations that you think are very personal can become more public at that point. Sorry, you had a question?
No, I just said oops.
Oops, yeah, I mean, oops is not the way. Imagine what would have happened that the father sued Target upon this. There's a big case that went on and Target settled out of the court because what Target did was incorrect. But what Target is trying to do, my point is, it's not Target as an entity, but who made this decision? A data analytics researcher or data analytics person in Target. He didn't know whether it was right or wrong. All he did was use data patterns, to identify here is what you need. So essentially, it's who should you blame and why should you blame him? All he was doing his job or her job. So that's the kind of conundrum you have. Let me give you another example. I'm not freaking you out, but these are all important things that are happening.
So in that one, I think the mistake was they went family market basket rather than individual.
Mm-hmm.
That could be solved by tying it to individual.
You could, but I'm just giving you one instance of a problem, right? But as you magnify it, at the end of the day, there's a lot of bias that can come in, and unless you really look at it carefully, it may not be a thing. Let me give you an example. So I was working with a very large auto manufacturer in Detroit. I don't want to name a name because of confidentiality. So I was talking to and this company was very clear about that they are going to be big in AI and automation. So they even said, I'm not going to make cars. I'm going to make my business a mobility business. A big difference. I'm not making an assembly line cars, but I'm actually making my cars do better things. So that way they are on the road all the time with less cars in the market. So this guy this was a real story. I was talking to this person. So he was working for this research institute in this particular automobile company. And all they were doing was to try to understand how AI can help identify better issues in the car. Now, and all your cars, by the way, if you buy a recent car, they transmit information. A lot of these information get maybe downloaded or can be collected by the car if they need it, and they can use that information for better decisions. That's the purpose around it. But this person was asking me a story. Hear this story. This person was telling me that based on the information that the car emits, I can tell whether the driver is driving under the influence. Just based on how the brakes are done, how the car is moving, I can compare that real time with how another person who's influenced by alcohol drives. I can then predict whether you're driving under the influence or thing. So if I do that, and I know that I can do this, I don't need to individually look at it. I can write a code, I can write an AI thing where I can allow it to identify, okay, in the current market, you have these many vehicles where these many drivers are actually driving after drinking alcohol. should I now call my cops? Because at this point, I'm trying to save the driver because he or she is driving under the influence. And so if he or she continues to do that, they may get killed or they may hit somebody. So I now know I have power in me to actually stop them. I can do two things. I can call the cops on them, or I can stop the vehicle. Again, these vehicles are stop the vehicle completely. They can, like a lot of these cars have access where again you can actually have a Ford can stop its vehicle as long as and then stop it from moving. So his question to me was, what is wrong in that? What is wrong in like doing? Now I'm becoming a. Think about it. This is what AI is giving me. AI is giving me power to save life, according to me, but it's infringing on that person's ability to drive with or without alcohol, and it's kind of a spying game at this point, right? Like so, these are issues there. Yeah.
Yeah. That you're going to get if you get all the fish that you want, you're going to get a couple other fish, like somebody who may have mild epilepsy is going to show you the same pattern.
Yeah, good point. So then how do I not mistake a person who's driving with under the influence to a person who has epilepsy, right? I don't know those questions. But at the end of the day, I can make the decision and should I make or not? These are the questions that managers are asking me today as we think about the use of AI. This was Amazon. We all think Amazon is great, but Amazon also had AI issues. Amazon, think about this, was using large language model to identify who should Amazon employ. And what it did was it trained all those large language models using current employees' backgrounds. And so when it started training and started using that large language model to identify, so Amazon on an average receives about 500,000 CVs every year. I mean, like, so it doesn't have time to go through all of them. So when I use pattern matching and pattern recognition and all, and when I use data sets that are being trained by using existing Amazon employees, Amazon found out that if your CV says, I belong to a girls' chess club, if your CV says something about, okay, I graduated from a women's college, you were all eliminated. Because most of the Amazon employees at that point were male. So as soon as their CVs, as soon as the large language model started seeing patterns about female references in the CV, it started eliminating, saying you're not. So it didn't even look at the skill sets, it didn't even look at, it just looked at, are you a male or a female? And then it said, okay, we need more males here. And so I'm going to eliminate all the female CVs. Again, if you think about it, that's a gender bias. Now, Amazon, what happens is Amazon immediately rectified it. And it's an open story. It found out there was a big fault in their algorithm and they rectified it. But again, it's a big problem. Like when who is responsible for all these things? There's not a single entity, because these kind of technologies empowered with everybody in the organization. So you can make a decision that you might think is correct, but at the end of the day, it's biased. It's unethical at that point, right? So another example, I'll start with the last one. Again, I'm giving you different examples in different industries. In healthcare, there was a very big case with United Health. You go and look at United Health and AI. So United Health was using AI to identify who should I really approve for reimbursements. And it was rejecting certain group of people based on gender, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. Because, again, those group of people, based on what it was trained, were not really getting better, were not really paying the dues, whatever it is. And so it really biased against really protecting them. So again, and the United Health got into a big trouble. I think they settled for an off-court for $1 billion and said, like, okay, we've got to settle this and correct this bias. These are the kind of problems you will face, where again, companies, and I can't think of a single company that is not using AI in terms of decision making. Every company, everybody is using it. And can we stop that? No, we cannot stop that. But the question is, how do you manage? That's where this idea becomes is, again, this is no longer technology becoming a technology thing, but there are these big data risks. The same thing, I mean, like if you were if you can use the same idea in classrooms, where again, based on If you think about classroom exams and responses and all, you can use AI to correct it, but there could be some lot of bias in terms of how you think about those corrections. So there is a lot of risk that are out there that is not properly understood, right? So this is where we ended up studying it. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today, or what did we learn? So we did this as an interdisciplinary team. Like I said, it is important not just to look at it from a business standpoint, but from various other standpoints. So we did a lot of interviews, we collected some more data. So this was an ongoing work that we did over a period of, like, if you look at it, all your AI revolution, whatever I call it, happened after 2021. Okay, that's when. But even before 2021, a lot of companies were using a lot of AI technology. They don't call it as AI revolution. Some of these companies were using AI technologies as early as 2000s, even 1995s and 90s. So what we see as AI revolution is not just now. It's happened a lot. It's accelerated is what we find. So we actually ended up studying some of these companies and all, and there is a book that we wrote. Now this is free to download, so you can actually go, it's open access book. So we summarized what we learned on all these things and what companies should do and all. So it was an interdisciplinary work that you can go and read it. So it talks about some of the things that I'm talking right now, but it also goes beyond that. There is also other aspects of what we call algorithm bias and how do you really manage algorithm bias and so on. So again, it's something that we learned over time that this is a very important problem that companies have to really manage. So that's where we started forming this as, this is no longer just AI, this is creating more responsible governance around AI. So it's the idea around managing this more responsibly within the organization and not just within one function. So you go to many organizations today, even today, AI belongs to maybe IT people, or AI belongs to maybe what we call risk and what we call legal people. That's not how AI should be managed. So very clearly, we started finding patterns that if I go and study 10 organizations where they're looking at AI, I would say 6 or 7 of them are using that approach where it belongs to one entity. It belongs to the chief information officer or chief legal officer. Versus in other organization, AI belongs to the CEO, meaning it's covering everybody. It's covering within every organization, every part of the organization. So the more and more we study this, the more and more we find that there has got to be like a more, I would say, a systemic approach to managing AI. It should not be bits and pieces of managing AI, which is what our study is finding in so many ways there. Now, these are some risks. Again, like at this point, you should all know that these are the risks that are there happening because of AI. There's a privacy issue, they talked about it. Manipulation, again, like you all knew this in 2016, a whole election was manipulated based on, again, the AI coming in and really, like, again, doing certain things, creating fake news and so on and so forth, right? That's there. Bias is another important thing. We talked about procedural unfairness, but then these are additional risks that are starting to emerge with AI. But think about it, there is hypersegmentation, where again, housing markets, we see that there is a lot of discrimination based on who you actually as a buyer bid. That's because of the use of AI in a wrong way. It creates more inequality in terms of how this is done, clearly displacing labor. And even more, if you look at it right now, there is hate speech, hallucination, even to the extent of IP violation. So AI, again, can help you, but AI can also hate you, hurt you in some of these kind of risk aspects. And again, it's very hard at this point if you don't have a systemic approach. If you just have a more of a bits and pieces approach, it's very hard for you to control it, and you actually get into the news for the wrong reason. That's why you see more and more of news about like AI doing the wrong thing because of the wrong reasons out there.
So, could you explain a little bit more how the systemic approach will help them?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about that. But the other thing I also want to say is that you don't have proper laws on AI. So right now, there is not a single law that will tell, again, all these stories happen because the person that was sending the target coupon There was no anything that they were doing illegal because there's no laws that are saying you should not do those certain things. Even in Europe, again, sometimes we say European countries are more prone on AI laws. Even there, some of their AI Act and AI laws that they have is still not really powerful. The reason why it's not there is we don't understand it. A lot of these things are happening right now. So that's why, again, there is very hard laws that allows you to really understand those things. So, the traditional way to think about some of these issues, the traditional way these were managed is based on what we call as consent process. So if you all remember, you said Kroger is where you went. So if you were to remember the first day you went to Kroger, where you ended up like buying what we call as a frequent flyer card, right? Like you all have a frequent flyer card. I don't know if you remember this. You had to go and scroll down, if you remember, and then sign yes, that I'm okay with that. I can bet a lot of money right now to tell you didn't read anything there. You never read anything. And same thing, if you read now, sign up for credit cards or anything, there is 3 or 4 or 5 pages of information that's given to you. I can tell you, none of you would have read it. You just scroll down and say yes, right? That is how the laws are right now. Clearly, like it's not helping or informing public because that's what we call as consent process. So what we find is clearly that there is no laws, there is no legal compliance. So companies have to be proactive. Organizations have to be more proactive to go beyond this and create those kind of compliance. So that's where this whole idea of responsible AI management comes in. Is now, since there are no laws and since AI can drive you nuts, it's important for organizations to really self-govern themselves. This is what we have seen. So one thing we have seen is this: there are some frameworks I'm going to talk to you about. There are some frameworks that organizations use to govern their AI strategy. But I can also tell you, only if we have done this with about 100 organizations so far. I don't want to name them. Some of them are also in your own neighborhood, in your own backyard. I can tell you that out of those 100 plus organizations where we asked them about frameworks to manage AI, I would say about 20 or 30 would have those frameworks. 70 of them don't have it, which really means that people are using it incorrectly everywhere. Maybe, and it's not noticed. It's just a matter of time when it gets noticed and creates all those problems. Even in those 20 or 30 that are using, we only see 4 or 5 organizations where everybody is using it consistently. So which means there's a lot of problems that are happening. So that's where, again, for future research for everybody in this room or who is watching, there is a lot you can really study about this, because this is a place where there's no laws. This is a place only a few organizations are doing it. Even those few organizations, only a very few of them are doing it consistently, which really tells you that there is a lot of opportunities to really scale it and do it better. This is based on some of the work that we have done and others have done them too. So a couple of things that I'll tell you, going back to your question, is, first of all, like to do this effectively, you need to answer these 3 things. So one is, who should own these kind of AI responsibility in the organization? That's very important to know. And then, given that, like I said, some of these rules and dialects around AI is changing almost every hour, how should we really think about understanding that? Because it's not something where a technology comes in. I mean, like you've all seen the next ChatGPT 4.0, right? Have you all seen the new one that allows you to like draw pictures? And as you think about it, you can do a lot of hallucinations with those things. So what ChatGPT and OpenAI is doing is just pushing it out, but it's creating more and more and more problems for other companies and other areas to do this. So how do you really know, or how do you really understand what's happening out there? I'll talk a little bit about that. And then how do you really then scale it in the organization? I'll talk to you about that. So the point is, again, it's very important, if you think about it, is to do this organizationally. So one way to do this organizationally, and what's your name? Sorry. One way to do this organizationally is, first of all, what we have seen is you've got to have new entities in the organizations. In many of the organizations, they are called as chief AI officers. So every organization has a CEO. There is a CFO, Chief Finance Officer. There is a Chief Operating Officer. In most of the organizations that uses AI right now, there is something called AI Manager or AI Officer, but then they report to Chief Information Officer or CIO. That's how you see it. That is too late. That's not how it should work. In very proactive organizations where AI is now becoming a whole strategy, you see these entities called Chief AI Officers coming in. Now, what do? Is basically they have these kind of skills. The point is, how do I differentiate a Chief AI Officer from a Chief Information Officer? Because that's a very common thing. A Chief Information Officer might have good knowledge on data science and AI governance and all, but a Chief Information Officer may not understand how to collaborate, how to understand those kind of problems, how to go around silos, how to think about ethics and all those things. So what we find is that a Chief AI Officer is that kind of a person who can not only understand the technology around it, but also the human element of the technology around it. And we see that is clearly happening. And we see most of these people directly report to the CEO. It's like right there. They are not hidden somewhere here. In some companies that I've done work with, they are hidden under like 3 or 4 levels down. What that means is that like any issues that are ramping up, it takes more and more time and more delays to actually get magnified and addressed. And as a result, there is a delay. In these kind of instances, delay means more lawsuits and more issues that are out there. So what we find is that the more they are closer to the CEO in terms of making decisions, the better it is that they are doing. And then we have done some work in parallel work in healthcare, but I've seen the same thing. The more you actually make decisions that are closer. So we've done some work in healthcare where we found that if you're up in the organization and doing this more effectively, you actually have better off really managing this very well. So one of the questions that I always ask when I go and give talks with managers with things is, how frequent are your C-suites informed on AI risk? So when you talk about this as a C-suite, do you really have conversations around what kind of AI risk? Like I showed you a lot of AI risk earlier. What kind of AI risks are coming from the technologies they're using there? And how do you know that they're changing? And how do you know? So I asked them, the second question is, do you have committees that can help you? It's not a single individual. Do you have committees that can actually inform you on some of these things? In fact, more and more organizations are going towards what I call having 2 different committees. Having something internally that helps to support and understand this, but having something externally also. Because a lot of these knowledge is changing so significantly. So those are 2 things that I find very interesting is if I look at it, not a lot of companies are doing it, but companies that are doing it very strongly are actually thinking along these lines to make sure that they have commitment around not just the AI, but the AI governance as a whole, right?
Are you okay for a question?
Yeah, please.
So
make it direct.
when you think about that structure, roughly speaking,
Yeah.
what percent of, let's just use public boards as an example, just to make it easy. And what percent use the risk committee on the board versus create a new committee?
It's a good question, right? So creating a new committee is always challenging, right? Like, so what I've seen companies do is augment the risk committee by bringing in a few more people that can inform on some of these other risks that we're getting into. So that's
Specifically from an audit perspective, you're going to be auditing financials.
Yes. Correct. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, like rather than creating a whole sub new committees, what I've seen more and more is getting like right people. And like for instance, I'll show you some examples. Google has an external committee where it's bringing in certain different people at times to make sure that they're informed on what's happening on these things. They're even some of these committees I'm talking about is even having legislations. Some people from the legislature.
Google operates almost more like a government.
Correct.
Then we need to have proper stakeholder.
Correct. Yeah.
So who will be on the external committee again?
Yeah, I'll say it will be some of the think tanks will be sometimes
Industry partners?
sometimes even your customers.
Okay.
Sometimes your suppliers and customers,
But
because
then
again,
those will be those who know about AI, right?
yeah, or those who know about the risks around the AI. So they don't need to be. So not all of these committees need to know everything about AI, but they need to understand the risks around this. Again, so having let's say, like going back to the Target incident, right? Like if you were to have the right people in there, they will understand, okay, these are the kind of things that can be harming me because of these things. How do we manage it? So you need that kind of a mindset there. Yeah.
So what are these committees? Are they looking at the data itself? What are they doing? So I'm thinking about one of the harms being bias.
Yeah.
So all the time, or at least most of the time, the bias isn't coming from what
Inside.
the bias comes from the bias that's already in society, seen in the data,
Correct.
and AI is doing. So we're just concentrating the bias that already existed.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So how does a committee stop that from happening?
You need to have-
How do you do that?
Yeah, in some instances, there are something called bias scouts in these committees. Bias scouts, their whole responsibility, let me give you an example. So in one of these cases, there was like inferences of making like decisions on like some sort of prenatal care, okay, using some data that allows you to understand, okay, for these kind of population, you need to have these kind of prenatal care and so on and so forth, right? Very important, and AI was doing it. Okay, but one of the things that this was happening was the data that they were representing it did not represent like immigrant women, refugee women that are coming into the city. And there was a significant amount of refugee women coming into the city, and they were, again, having different practices of prenatal care.
So how does this committee notice things? I mean, the only examples I see of noticing it is when we have egregious things coming to light.
So in this case, again, in this company, the way this was noticed was basically they were, again, these committees met on a monthly basis to talk about here are the new ideas that are coming out of these AI things. Here is how the new ideas are forming out of these things. And how, are there any issues in these new ideas, the new algorithms that are coming in? And these monthly kind of cadence that were happening out there, they identified, they immediately spotted off saying, okay, you're talking about all these things. Have you looked into this of how this kind of a prenatal care model is going to affect the immigrant population or the refugee population that we have out there? The bias scout that are there, which was an external think tank, brought this to their attention. So that way they were able to correct this immediately. And before the product was released, they were able to change the decision parameters in the product. So
in that case, they were looking at the recommendations of who to market this to, and that's how
Yes.
the anomaly showed up.
yes, but it was not too late. It was not. They were bringing this idea to this committee on a frequent basis. So what I'm saying here is, if you have this kind of a holistic committee that allows you to do this, how often you engage them? Okay, and what we find, in fact, let me tell you something on the parallels, right? This is not, by the way, this is not uncommon in innovation work. Okay, in innovation work, there's a lot of uncertainty that happens. So in fact, some of the work that I've done way back in like mid 2000s, 2010 or on, I studied about in the innovation world, there is no bias, but there is more risks. So I studied a thing where this was a big company, we don't want to name them. So it made what we call rugged laptops that allows you to like operate on high temperature, high pressure situations and all. What we found out in this case was this laptop or this idea started off as something like an idea that allowed you to reimburse certain things. Oh, this was the tornado warning. Okay.
Flash flag, you're fine. Flash
Fine, okay. So the idea here was a lot of information on this kind of a new idea, new technology changed over the course of the product itself. And because of the fact that they were not able to identify the risk and change the correct core structure, the company itself failed to present here. And this company is actually something that you and I know. It's called Motorola, right? Motorola. So if you look back and what we studied in this is how do you really manage these kind of things, which is what the committee is doing. They're actually tracking risk. What we find is that they are looking at, so going back to your question is, they are looking at like these kind of risks in every product or every algorithm that they are using. Are there risks on the design and the process and supply and technology and the user and the regulation? They're really tracking this on a weekly basis. And then any changes in this, based on what they have, is being reported and discussed. Again, that's what the committee is doing, is to clearly track them on a frequent basis and report it out. There is also weekly communication. This is where the role of CIO or Chief AI Officer comes in. There's very much of a weekly communication of these risks or the changes and risks so that everybody is informed. It's not just top down, it's also bottom up. So everything was informed and everything is visual. And then there is also external changes that are happening outside. And that's also been brought into this kind of a discussion through the external committees that I'm talking about.
I mean, just a quick question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, another way of looking at it is, I mean, all you're talking about is companies using AI and algorithms, what issues might come out and how committees can. So that's more of the demand side of AI, using AI, right? But you must have heard about the epic system sepsis prediction algorithm,
Yeah.
which, so that's more of, I mean, from the supply side, right? If
Yeah.
there are issues, I mean, how do these governance structures that you're
Very,
talking about?
very, I mean, it's a good point, right? Like, so my point is let's start targeting one at a time, right?
Yes.
So that one is going to take more time. The supply side of it is even more complicated.
Yeah.
But the idea around that is, again, let's get these kind of things first in hand.
Yeah.
So that way we can approach it. So yeah, but we are not at this point even at that things there, right? Like, it's important to know this. But somebody asked me who's in these committees. Look at this. This is an example of a committee that is operating in like an institution at this point to really identify these kind of risks. You see, it's more versatile. It's not just like everybody's a technologist or everybody's a data scientist. You have lawyers, you have strategists, and you have even bias scouts. The bias scouts, the job is to really say, okay, are there algorithms that are biased? Is the algorithm that you're making, you're developing these insights, is it really representing the population algorithm? So if not, again, let's flag it right there. So some of these things are happening as early as the product is getting started, not when the product is delivered and really out in the market. So it's very, very important. And the more they do it more frequently, you're actually correcting the bias more and more. That's what we see in the committee. But you had a question or?
Yeah.
So here is what we have found. Again, like these committees that we find, they report clearly directly to the AI officer. They actually are able. The other thing that we find very important is this aspect of stopping and killing any initiatives right there. It's very hard. Like, again, I don't want to name these companies. There are some companies where I'm talking about multi-million-dollar initiatives getting stopped because of issues, getting killed, not like reoriented, restructured, getting killed because of issues like this, which is going to create more bias and more bad algorithms going out. And that's a job that cannot be done at a middle management level. That's a senior management, even a C-suite decision at some point. So it's very, very important to have these kind of initiatives where there's proactive decision making, not reactive. So a lot of times, one of the questions I always ask when I go and study these things is are you looking at AI to be proactive or reactive? If you're looking at AI to be proactive, which is what you should all think about, what kind of infrastructure do you have? You have these things. If not, you're actually at the reactive. So what we find is, again, a lot of these things are very infant. It's not happening through it. That's the reason why you see still there's a lot of problems like what you just said from Epic starting to happen, because it's very early infancy out there. Even more infant is the external committee. Now, you asked me who are there in the external committees. So here's an example from Google. So if you look at Google, I know Google is its own government, like you just said, but there are others, like Intel is another example. They have, like, for instance, some of their leading people are not even from their institution, but from the other institutions. So Google's AI external committee actually has members from various other research institutions that actually know about this and see what it is. There is public policy experts, given that there is lots of legal ramifications around it. Sometimes there are global representatives. And I said about consumers, sometimes you have a consumer. I'm not talking about an end user, but I'm talking about a consumers. And then sometimes your suppliers too. In most of the cases, you have your strategic partners or your suppliers. So having those kind of like people that are surrounding you to make informed on any changes, anything that are happening, having that kind of information lead to you actually helps you a lot in making better decisions. So that's something that I'm starting to see. This is not prevalent everywhere. One of the reasons, why do you think it's not prevalent everywhere?
Secrecy.
Exactly. So one of the things that they worry about is, again, okay, by putting it out there, is my product IP under protection, right? It's my product IP under thing. That is a trade-off that you need to manage. That is a trade-off that you need to think about in terms of, okay, is it something that, how much of your AI has to be really protected? So there are three examples out here, actually. If there is a good case studies around this. If you look at how OpenAI, how Gemini, and how, again, Copilot were developed. Again, OpenAI, a lot of, like Microsoft owned a lot of OpenAI too. Like to think about it. But those three development will tell you a lot of stories about how these kind of external committees were in place. OpenAI is more and more and more like these kind of things. It's actually like out there, put it out there. That's why you see a lot of products from OpenAI out there. Put it out there, let's learn from it, get back, put it out there, let's come with this. Copilot was completely different, the way they managed. So, and then of course, you have like Google, which is even more. So if you look at it again, like it's the more you actually put it out there in these kind of things, because one of the questions I always have is your AI is not anymore a competitive weapon. So whatever OpenAI is bringing in, cloud can bring it the next day. So it's not that algorithm that's going to be a secret weapon. In most cases, in these kind of rat race, it's the first market advantage that's your secret weapon. I mean, like the same way that Google conquered the world, because when Google came in with all the other features, you had another big search engine, right? You all remember that? What was that?
Yeah.
Yahoo, right? I mean, like, but Google, I mean, so if you think about it, on the core, Google's like platform and AI, and like Yahoo's platform, Google was doing the exact same thing that Yahoo was doing, but Google was much integrated. Like the way it was integrating, if you all remember the Google Mail, the Google Cloud, the Google Photos, in a much one like with Yahoo, and all Google did was come up with that kind of a what we call as a cloud-based solution before Yahoo did that.
Ecosystem.
Yeah, before Yahoo did that, and it doesn't mean that Yahoo cannot do it or Bing cannot do it, and other people cannot do it, but it was too late at the end of the day, and that's the rat race. So I wouldn't say, like going back, I would say it's more important for you to put it out there, which is what OpenAI is doing, like their model, rather than just secretly working about it and hoping that your product is much better than the others, and then like it's then it creates more problems. So there is that. That's where these kind of ethical committees come in handy for what you do there. So this is something that, again, if you are all interested in this kind of work on responsible AI, what I would do is I would actually go to your companies and see again whether they have an AI strategy. If they have an AI strategy, what are they doing on the AI work? Who is reporting where, and what kind of decisions have been made? The more they're explicit around it, the more you know that they are proactively thinking, versus when they are just like not having those things, they are being very, very reactive.
What's your perspective on companies that are taking, let's say they've got a fairly solid structure, a decent set of policies around it, and the next step is then what are the mechanisms that are being put in place to help reinforce it?
Yeah.
Often those would then be technology stack mechanisms.
Yeah.
To make sure that we're giving some sort of guardrail.
So
Like, what's your perspective on what percent of companies?
very few are doing it, and very few are doing it in a way it can be scaled. Because think about like a lot of these things, you're talking about like remote workers, you're talking about like people that are working not in the same area. Training becomes a huge thing out there.
That's right.
Right? Like, how do I train my people in a way? Like, I go back to my auto example, because that data scientist that is making a decision whether to call the cops or not, how do I train them to say, this is not your job? Here is our structure of making my decision. And in that frame of mind, this is not a question that we should even ask about, or we should think about this differently. That training has to be done proper, and it's not.
Right. Well, so that example has two extremes.
Yeah.
One is kind of the nanny police state.
Yeah.
Piece, but the opposite would be negligence.
Yeah.
So then if you've got, so I think in that case, it would be proper for the data engineer to bring up the scenario.
Yeah.
And then let the company try to figure out.
Exactly. So the point, then the best thing to do for that case, thank you for bringing it up, is when the data scientists in these kind of committees bring it up to say, okay, here is something that we can do in the future. How do we do this in a way that the customers are informed
Right.
of these kind of things rather than just doing it proactively, right? Like, so then you put together some process, you then put some educational materials around this to the customers to say, I'm not saying this is happening, but in the future, we detect any anomalies in your driving pattern, we're going to put the kill switch on. I mean, like, then the customers are more informed on what is happening, then you go ahead and do this, right? Rather than just doing it. That's the idea of the process scaling, right? Not a lot of companies are doing it. And it's hard because, again, there is the whole, in the olden days, if you all remember the olden days, I call it as the Toyota production
So
system.
about 2021.
Not even 20. Yeah, I'm talking about like in the 1990s and like when we talked about like making patterns more recognizable, making more, it was easy because the technology around it did not change every day. The problem with what we have right now is the technology that is surrounding these things, or the science around this is changing more and more and more. So by the time you create good practices, your practices are getting redundant. That's what we see that's happening at this point.
Yeah, it's getting to what ones can't keep up. So I'm sure it will happen, if it hasn't already happened, that some companies will take a look, and this advisory will take a look at something and decide to kill it because it's too much of a burden for the company to know that information. For instance, a pattern that shows some illegal activity, a great large pattern of illegal activity in some of their customers, where if the company knows about it, they're going to be obliged to take action. They might choose to kill that so that they purposely stay ignorant because they don't want to get into that business of having to report blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So I'll give you a great example. I don't want to name the specific solution, but a company called Palantir.
Yeah.
Okay, as you all know, again, like they had so many of those products that they never made the market. That never made the market because they all felt if this technology goes into the wrong hands, it's easy. Exactly. It's easy. So these are like, again, these could have, here's my point. These could have been billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar revenue generating products for a company. But they did not do this ahead of time because they're looking at this from that overarching framework that's not just profit maximizing, but also get into the other aspects. And to do something like that, you need to have multidisciplinary idea.
For AI, I know when I worked at Hewlett Packard, we killed in the printing, we killed a project. We were getting sample data of how people were printing behavior, and we were finding that too much about what they were printing, and we were finding child pornography, and we're like, we don't want to happen.
Yeah. See, that's excellent point. That's why sometimes I feel it's old wine in new bottle, but the main difference is at that point you were talking about 1 or 2 or 3 technologies. Now you're talking about 1 million, 2 million, 3 million technologies because again, it's there's so many, and the applications around it also. At that point you had like 3 or 4 applications to what you have right now is a billion application potential out there. So that's where the problem is. So that's why I see a lot of old solutions can be applied here, which is again what is happening. So the bottom line in all these conversations is this idea of thinking and very strategic and going slow to go fast. So that's what this is happening. So because one of the complaints that I have when I go and talk about committees slow down decision making. Yes, I mean nobody is questioning that. Nobody is questioning that committees are going to slow down. But committees, if you bring in the right people in these committees, like I talk about, it allows you to get a different perspective. So maybe that slowing down of decision making is actually trading off to making better decisions down the line, which is what we are seeing here. Yeah.
So what is your opinion when you see the obvious conflict of profits versus ethical issues and who's going to win that? What is your opinion on the future of that conflict?
Yeah. My opinion is that, again, you're going to always see people who want to profit maximize for companies, but you surround those people with people like what I'm talking about. At least they are slowing down on that profit maximization. Because unfortunately, we all live in this corporate capitalistic world where, again, if I'm a Google, my performance is measured by how many new ideas I'm pushing it out, right? Like that's how I'm measuring performance. We are all talking about all these companies and even healthcare companies. But the question is, am I doing it judiciously? Am I doing it after I take into account of all the issues that can happen? And I can't model the entire thing, but am I really thinking about it from various standpoints? That's where it's okay to be slowing down. So I would expect, going back to your question, the answer is people will always be trying to maximize the potential from any of these technologies back to their firm, because that's the stakeholder theory. That's what they're interested in. But at the same time, if you surround them with these people and put these processes in place, it's going to get you a better product. That's what I see happening.
The hospitals, the non-profitable surgeries, you get all kinds of ethical territories.
Yeah. So, and that's where, again, you put in more and more checks and balances in place. There are going to be more questions asked in a way that at least you're going to be thinking and then acting rather than just acting. And that's what we see in these companies having these boards. Another example here, again, is like your Intel. Again, like, so if you look at it, these are the principles that what we're seeing more and more that are actually should be there when you think about behaviors and putting frameworks in. So your frameworks and the principles should have, like, again, is your AI fair? The first question I ask is, again, is your AI fair to everybody? How do I know that, right? Like, is it really, think about this when you think, yeah, it's not fair to a certain group of population, then we have a problem. Let's talk about this. Okay, that's the first question that I ask. Is your AI reliable and safe? How do I know that this is a technology that's reliable and safe? How do I measure that? So you can have a whole different discussion around that. Is your AI more protecting your privacy and security? Is it going to be some things that is going to be affected by the privacy and security because of this particular technology? Is it more inclusive? Is it really thinking about all the other aspects rather than just taking certain things out? Is it more accountable and transparent? So it's not like, one of the things about a lot of algorithm is it's kind of a hidden black box, okay, rather than I don't know what inside exists. So the more you make those more transparent to say, here is what it's calling on, here is what it's doing, here is the idea around that, that gives you more clarity around that. So what I have seen companies do in recent times is to take these, and these principles can change. These are some well-established principles that I've seen in companies that everybody is taking. There are standards that are getting established because of this. Like, one thing is there is, you might all know this thing called ISO. ISO is International Organization of Standards. So there's ISO 42001. So ISO 42001, ISO used to have these 9001, 14001. 9000 was for what they call quality standards. And then they had something called 14,000, which was for energy and sustainability standards, green energy and sustainability. Now ISO is coming up with new standards called 42001. And that's for AI standards. And those AI standards are based on these principles. So when you want to get an ISO 42001 as a company, there are audits that are happening in your company, and they measure whether your technology is fair, reliable, safe, private, secure, inclusive, transparent, and they have a whole checklist of how this comes in.
Didn't Gartner come out with a model recently?
They have their own. Gartner has their own. Again, it's very interesting. A lot of these models are out there, all rely on some combination of these things. But at the end of the day, this is what is getting into, right? Like, you have to get a combination of these things. Gartner has one. There's something called NIST that has another one. So there's a lot of standards out there. The reason why ISO comes in is ISO is very predominantly used in Europe. So European, and then I'm trying to do another project right now where I find people who got ISO 42001 companies, they are actually received well by the market. So market really thinks about them as ethically good companies. So there's a drive towards getting ISO certification for some of those standards out there. So what I'm telling you is that the first thing, if you were to do, if you were to ask me, what should I think about responsible AI? Wasted 50 minutes with you. What should I think about? I say start with these things. Start with these things to say, as you make about decisions on AI and AI technologies, are you thinking about these aspects? First thing. Second thing I would say, start with, are you having some of these things go up to the top? Okay, instead of getting somewhere here. which means do you have people like chief AI officers or somebody else who actually takes these things up to the top to make better decisions? Second thing, the third thing I'll say, are these standards getting routinely checked on? And to do that, you need to have these kind of advisory committees, internal and external committees. Are they doing that properly? That's what I would say is, again, like I would say, is a starting point. And you should do this systematically rather than department-wise or like functional-wise or not. So it's very important. The more you do that, then you become this kind of a company which is really thinking about AI and then the governance around AI more responsibly. In fact, there are lots of parallels. Again, if you look at some of these things in the operations world, there is something called Toyota Protection System or lean manufacturing, where the idea around that lean was a concept that came in Japan. And the idea around the lean was basically, these are practices that everybody should do in a way that things are fair and consistent and conforming all throughout. And the idea around that is the Toyota Protection System says that, again, take these principles, make these principles into practices, and make those practices into behaviors. So as you start doing that, again, it's the level of thinking. Principles is what I call first level of thinking, where at least I have an understanding. Then practices is, I would say, a second level of thinking, where at least I have an understanding and I know what I'm doing. Versus behavior is, I'm not only understanding and doing, but I'm behaving that way. So that anything that I think about in the future, that's what I'm doing. That's the idea around behavior. So I would say, like, companies have to think like that. Is how do I take my own ethical foundational framework and I move from principles to practices to behaviors. And again, you can do it. Some companies are starting to do it, but it's very early. That's what we are seeing is a very early nascent phase. And it has to happen everywhere. So I was one of the largest banking companies in the country, and I see that they are thinking about this across all sectors in the bank, not the front office or not the back office. It's everybody in the bank has to think about and reinforce themselves, say, this is our culture around AI. And that's very, very, very important. The other thing I'll also tell you is you can't ban AI. I think like there are companies that I've seen where they say, I'm going to ban AI and I'm going to ban my employees using from AI. It's not sustainable. So I've had companies where they say, through your company computers, I can't use ChatGPT.
Every company I've worked for so far has been.
Yeah. So what you see is that they used my own personal phone for ChatGPT. So I'm sorry? It's worse. It's worse. So what you should do is develop your own. So those companies I've been and I've asked them, okay, what is your problem with that? And there's a very legal problem, like you just said, like it's about IP protection. It's about like my data is out there. Okay? Can you build your own internal model? That's where we're seeing companies are going. So I work with JP Chase, and they have their own AI. So they have their own ChatGPT trained inside. I work with Nationwide.
The train doesn't go.
No, it's all inside.
It's contained.
It's contained. It's all inside. The intelligence stays inside. Now, there are portions where, again, intelligence come from outside to inform on the inside models, but the intelligence are very well contained inside. That's what companies have to do. It's not, again, you can't curtail. My point is you can't stop. Because I didn't do this project, but I've had some folks in this project where they actually collected data from companies where they ban AI, only to find that the use of AI, open AI, actually doubled. Basically because...
Yeah, exactly, my phone.
Yeah, exactly. You would use it different ways to manage it differently. Rather than that, the question is how do I use it more effectively in a way that I can still get the benefits, but at the same time I can manage my risks effectively. That's where companies have to start growing along those lines. So again, scaling up is a big issue. The thing that I tell you is, just to give you an example, scaling is always a problem. When you think about behaviors and things like that, scaling anything and making it consistently is a problem. So I just picked one example from some of the work that I've done in healthcare about how do I create this idea from principles to practices to behaviors. Just think about this one. So I did some work with what I call transplant teams, so kidney transplant teams that were where nurses were actually giving instructions about how to do good things to the patients. And one of the important instructions that they have to give is about drinking water. So a transplant recipient has to drink about 3 liters of water every day. And then there are reasons. Again, failure to adhere to the standard can result in increased creatine levels, and more creatine levels can increase blood pressure, and you come back. So clearly, there are standards what you have to follow. Now, when you think about hospitals and like nurses and all, they don't really follow these standards. So when I went out, just to give you an example, this is what I observed. Like again, when I observed, are these nurses really giving the same standards? Are they really following the same standards of telling every patient you've got to drink 3 liters of water? I observed different things. Like I observed sometimes nurses saying drink a lot of water. What's wrong with that?
Subjective.
A lot could be 2 liters for you, could be like 20 ml for you, right? I had another time drink a lot of fluids. What's wrong with that? Beer is a fluid. Yeah, I mean, I had a patient ask the nurse, again, can I drink more alcohol? The answer is no. I mean, like for every alcohol ounce, you drink 2 more. You should not drink alcohol after surgery, by the way. But the point is, but this is what happens when you're not having, so if you just say, I want you to follow certain things, you would see that they don't follow it because it's not properly done. So what Toyota Production System or others would tell you is, again, create some standards around it and make sure that the standards are followed by everybody, right? So the idea around that is people doing the work must design the standards. So, and then there should be no exceptions. Everybody should follow the standards. So what I'm saying is, when you think about responsible AI governance and managing it, it's not the AI officer or these committees developing standards. They develop principles. But once they develop principles, these standards have to be developed by these coders, these data scientists, and in a way that it's more scalable and more repeatable in that way. And everybody is doing that. So at the end of the day, I want to conclude by saying that, yeah, go ahead.
What is work standards?
Work standards means, how do I code these? How do I, like when I develop these codes or when I think about these issues, how do I make sure it's fair, it's reliable, it's scalable, it's consistent, it's transparent, right? How do I deem that to be necessary? So that's something that I can't develop, but that's something that you can develop as you think about working in that particular environment. So at the end of the day, again, what I'm seeing is companies are striving towards, if you really want to create a responsible AI governance, you first start off with, what are my guiding principles? We talked about some guiding principles. It's very important to have those guiding principles. It's very important to have management commitment. Like I said, if there are decisions that needs to be made where it's a big loss for you right now, but it's going to save your thing from corporate embarrassment down the line, it's important for you to do that. So it's clearly having more those kind of consistency and having a culture where, again, there's continuous improvement, continuous thinking in a way that things are actually questioned all the time and it's improved all the time. I think that's very, very important. So this is something that you can look at any lean or Toyota Production System kind of an idea, and that's what you get. So there is kind of a repetition of what has already been done. Some of the good work being done can be used as we think about the future. So the future is not bleak, but I think it has to be a systemic solution. So at the end of today, I mean, like, if you were to think about what is one thing is, don't compartmentalize AI in your organization. Bring it up to the top. Even though you might have only 2 departments using it or 2 entities, you've got to think about this systematically. And you've got to address these issues systematically, because that's the best solution towards managing this kind of an AI explosion in our organization. So I'll stop there. I don't know that you have any questions, but I thought, again, these are some ongoing work that I'm doing. So the idea around these kind of research is, we do this, then we go back to companies, we go measure them, how are they doing it, and then we actually go and collect more data to see whether they're accountable. So we are in that kind of a phase where we're going to companies and asking them these questions. And what we find, again, like I said, is there are some really good companies that are moving in the right direction, but everybody is starting at this point. So at least I'm very happy to note that people are thinking about this seriously. Now, if we just type chief AI officer right now, you will see that you'll see a lot of hits. You'll see a lot of companies. It's getting more and more. I think it's important. I think you've got to more and more keep that kind of momentum going, because you can't just say that I'm going to like, again, hide AI in my company or I'm going to use it incorrectly. I think that responsibility has to be shared by the companies given that there is no.
So a statement I'd like you to confirm if I've got it right.
Yeah.
And then based upon that, good questions. So it sounds like you're advocating that the real thing to do is just to formalize the responsible AI structure. Make sure that it reports as high in the organization
Yes.
as possible, preferably to the CEO.
Yes,
And then use that process and over time refine how you go.
exactly.
Okay. So companies that are in lead,
Mhm.
what are they doing? Okay, where are they in the process?
They have formalized the AI structure. So I'll give you, these are all public information. So Intel is a good example. You can go and look at Intel. So Intel has already developed their structure around AI thinking. They have a chief AI officer that goes in. Intel explains to all their board, any stakeholders about how AI decision making is done using internal and external committees. Intel is also trying to train all their scientists about how to think about these things as you think about working with AI. Right? So one example of a leading company that's getting into some of these things early enough than the others.
And then the companies you talk to, in what ways are they? Here's what I find.
Yeah.
Everyone says, yes, this makes sense, check. Yes, we should do it, check. And like all preventative maintenance items, it becomes a secondary.
Yeah.
How are people moving it from being a secondary priority to being a higher?
I think that's exactly where having these kind of stakeholder buy-in. The other thing that I didn't mention a lot that you should have is you should have your corporate board buy-in. So what I have seen in some of these companies is the board that oversees the CEO, oversees the organization, buys in this idea that it's okay to have like these kind of, maybe you might think it's a slow down decision, but it's okay to have this level of complexity in decisions rather than just making quick decisions. So getting that board lined up to make sure when CEOs are saying, okay, I'm going to stop this project or stop this thing, I'm not getting fired. Because again, it's not a cost versus revenue decision, it's cost versus like ethical decisions, right? So getting that, I see that also as an important thing, is getting your corporate board buy-in.
So I'm on a CIO roundtable. One of the things that I'm hearing from my peers on this forum is the first use case. It's pretty simple. It's note taking for the board meetings.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
once you start initiating that note taking for the board meetings,
Yeah.
and we're a little bit late, a year ago, right? You say that, and then people say, "Oh, that's pretty cool. How do I do it? How do I draft?" And then that's kind of an easy way into the more advanced.
Yeah.
How do we use it for strategic thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, the problem again, if you think about it, there are two ways that and other people can comment on this. We're not talking about like the AI for routine work. There is less of it like note taking in my work, like it's a routine work. It's again like right now I'm assuming like this recording, there is an AI right there.
Yeah.
That's going to take my routine work. That's going to transcribe what we have talked. It's going to even summarize to you. If you were to listen to this and okay, do that, that's routine in my work. All they're doing is doing the secretarial work. Where it becomes complex is, okay, now I take that and then I interface that with some other like things. And you are sitting after that to say, let's take this talk from AC and this knowledge out there and give me some recommendations out of that can inform me. What's going to happen? That's a Gen AI model. What's going to happen at that point is then if that recommendations is biased or if that data that is out there is not really good, I'm going to get some recommendations that are not really right for me, right? Like, how do I know that's the right thing to do? How do I stop that, right? That's where you need to have this kind of a systemic thinking rather than like, so most of the times, again, if I ask any employee in any organization, what are your three most important applications of AI today? They would say like, again, note taking, they would say like emails, and they would say like summary of like other articles or presentations and things like that. Exactly, yeah. But I think where this becomes more pivotal is, okay, when I make decisions based on this, right? Like selecting suppliers. Like for instance, I work with a logistic, we are in FedEx here, and I not work with FedEx, but I work with a very large trucking company, where the trucking company is the main reason why they're using AI is to talk about like, how do I say, like I have these 7 or 8 criteria in which I need to find logistics suppliers for. Okay, the typical criteria is like quality, safety, and all those things. But there's also reputational value. Now, again, how do I measure that properly in a way that I'm not getting biased reputational value of it? So then when AI spits me, okay, these are the three companies, how do I know that these are the right three companies? And what kind of algorithm goes inside to make sure that's fair? I mean, how do I know that the decisions that are made is based on fair, transparent, reliable, safe? I mean, that's where you need this kind of.
As you engage in this research, how deeply are you getting into the landscape of the tool providers that support responsible AI?
We there's a lot we do with them, with the front line. We call them with the front line. So like in some of these, like in the automobile work that we did, we went all the way to the front line that were writing codes to say, okay, how do you write codes on these? What kind of technology that goes in? How do you like prepare yourself to make sure you're using these kind of algorithms to do that? So we get into it. Now, there is a group of me, I'm not a part of it, but there's a group in this group which actually goes even into the, how do I make sure my algorithms are not biased, even before they start? Like even before these things are happening, how do I bring the bias, take the bias out of my writing of the algorithm itself, right? Like there's a group of people at Ohio State that are doing that at this point. But this is, I would say, a very active space where researchers is getting into so many different things. And you mentioned about the other problem. Again, at this point, I'm looking at one side of the problem. There's the other side of the problem. How do I do that? And how do I do that consistently and scale? That's another issue.
I mean, they're all biased, right? You're striving towards not having.
Yeah, you're striving towards not minimizing the bias.
No model is perfect.
Yeah, you're striving towards minimizing the bias in a way that it's not hurting anybody else. That's the main thing, is how do I make sure it's fair in a way it's not hurting it.
I appreciate this topic. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. It scares the heck
Yeah,
out of me
yeah.
every time I really spend some time thinking about it. I think I'm a little bit more glasses half empty, where it said, your basic criteria, make sure it's safe. I would say make sure it's not doing harm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, think about this. Like, the next time I'll tell you when you consent for any of these things, try reading them. I mean, I don't know if you've tried reading them or not. It's like 4 or 5 pages. Scary. But there's a lot that you're writing it as information. So if you all have a shopper's card, you're already like contributing your data to it, right? Like, how do you know that again? And you're using like Facebook, and like, how do you know by just liking something in a Facebook, your data is not captured by somebody else who's actually going to influence somebody else based on your influence, right? It's a scary world out there. So there is a lot that you have to put as checks and balances. What I'm not talking about is the individual way. I mean, like, I'm talking more at the corporate level, right? Like, so it's a whole different thing when you unpack this for individuals, like you just said. And I don't think there's any solution out there at this point. Yep.
Maximize. We could all come up with many.
Yeah.
So, could I just ask a
Yeah.
question on bias?
Yeah.
So, most of the LLMs are more, the large data has come from the Western
Yes.
world. So what do we do in the ASEAN, world? How can we feed into this LLMs to ensure
Yeah.
that there is less biasness towards the Asian community?
Absolutely. I mean, it's starting to happen, right? Like in the medical world, for instance. Nowadays, when medical decisions are used, like again, they're requiring like some of these things to be more heterogeneous sample, okay, in a way that again, you're not just looking at, like, for instance, you're not looking at Caucasian percentage of patients alone. You're looking at African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and that representation that you have in your data should represent the population that you're representing. Otherwise, go collect that data. Go collect that data and do that, right? Like, so clearly, a lot of institutions are getting into this idea of like biasness out there. The only way, the problem here is we can do this only as long as data exists. What if you don't have any data? So, like, for instance, like, there are some researchers where again they find that, like, in healthcare, I'm talking about, there's not a lot of data from African countries in the US about like how their health behaviors changes and all. So it's not like there's no data out there. So it's going to take you 3 different efforts, right? First, to go and establish that data, then like use that data to make those informed decisions. So it's a process, but what I'm seeing is that companies are getting more and more cognizant of that bias that you're talking about and are trying to control it. I forgot this name of the company, you guys might know. This is the facial recognition company that ended up creating, if you look at our passport control, I forgot the name of the company. So, and if you travel internationally nowadays, you don't need to go and show your passport, right? Like you have your passport with you, just walk in, and there's a facial recognition company. Have you guys seen that?
Intermax.
Yeah. So the point is, he had a bias thing. It was unable to really create some features for a certain group of individuals. It was not Asians, I forgot. Certain group of individuals, but completely like when they ran the report and all, it was not really. So that was an algorithm problem. So then they had to stop it. They had to go and collect more data, more pictures around them, and train the models and all. Then they established. So again, you can only correct bias as long as data exists. And my concern is sometimes you don't have all the data. And that's where it becomes more problematic because without data, I can't inform anything.
And then you create synthetic data, but the synthetic data may have a bias.
Exactly. And if you create synthetic data, how do I know the synthetic data represents the characteristics of the original data, right? Like, so that's where, again, like the more, what I see is that there is a need for, all these things are basically like prediction based on existing data and existing patterns, right? Pattern recognition. It's more important for you to fill the first hole than getting that.
The company is IDEMIA.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, I think, yeah, right. They had some problems. If you read about it, it's all public knowledge that they had some problems where they couldn't recognize certain group of individuals. And then, so every time you go, imagine this: every time you go into the airport and you do this, certain group of individuals are always asked to go for a certain line. Okay, and like it happens to be based on the color. All of a sudden, you can think about this. Okay, these kind of individuals. So all of a sudden, you are doing. If I'm the TSA provider or the person out there, it now creates a perception that I am actually biased against you guys when my algorithm is biased because it's saying that I can't detect you, so come to a different line, and that becomes an issue.
It's like where you sit in the classroom, up front or in back, creates a bias.
Bias too. Yeah. So all of those things again, you need more data.
So coming to the C-suite, right? Okay, I come from a university which is more technological oriented. So I'm fine with, they are fine, they are good. The C-suite is good, they know. But again,
But everything in KL is good.
Yes, everything in KL is good.
So what is KL?
Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, yeah. So what happens to, institutions where C-suite is clueless, might be clueless and all that? So guys have to be that training and all that sessions first or what?
Yeah, I mean, like educating them, right?
Educate them.
That's the thing to do is like having them educate. You know, these kind of bias can exist. You know, this is going to create more problems for you down the line if you don't do this correct. Educating them out there, surrounding them with good people, like I said. And that's where, again, when I think about C-suite, I always talk about, like in other research, I've done the same thing. If you really want the C-suite to be committed to any initiatives, always go back and ask, are your board of directors committed to the same initiative? If the board is not behind you, the CEO might go the next day, another person comes in, but the board is really committed, then it allows you to, like, I wrote a paper, again, you can read this, it's a Harvard Business Review article on creating a culture around innovation. And one of the things I talk about, that if you really want to create culture around innovation as a company, don't start with the CEO, start with the board, even above the CEO. That way, and even like if the board, one of the board member turns over, then you make sure start with the new board member, so that way they are informed. So that's the only way you keep that DNA going. Otherwise, like again, people go, people come. It's very important for you.
Read a stat that I think like less than 1/3 of board members are technologists, we say. So
Yeah.
have any kind of technology.
And that's where you need to get them on board. That way they understand around the dangers of these technologies. Even though they may not have the understanding of this, they are smart people. They understand how or why they should think about this. So that way they actually push this kind of initiatives in the organization. That's what I've seen now. Okay.
Yes, I think we are almost at time. So
Great,
let's
thank
give a
you.
round of applause.
Thank you.